Today, we're going to have a session. We're talking about full lifecycle API management with Apigee and Anthos service mesh. My name is Greg Kuelgen. I'm an app modernization specialist here at Google Cloud. I'm based in the Portland, Oregon area. I've been around here for about 5.5 years, and it's my distinct pleasure today to be able to present here with my friend, Miguel. Miguel, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Greg. Hey, everybody. Yeah, my name is Miguel Mendoza. I'm a CE specialist here in Google as well. I'm Greg's peer. And yeah, I joined Google back in 2018, and I'm glad to be here to be presenting today. And I'm based out of California, Bay Area.
Awesome. Thanks, Miguel. All right, so I'm going to go over the agenda of what we're going to cover. But before I do that, just a little tiny bit of logistics. We will have time at the end for question and answer, but I do want to have you wait for the end to go ahead and ask your questions. If you do have questions, do feel free to put them in chat. We will address them when we get to the Q&A section, but if you don't want to forget or you've got a question at the time, feel free to put it there. But we do ask that you stay on mute for the duration of the presentation. Honestly, that makes it easier. We want to be able to put this up on YouTube. Makes it easier for us to put it up on YouTube. You can share it with all of your friends and all of your best friends and things, your family maybe. It's going to be that exciting. I'm confident of it. So what are we going to cover? First, I'm going to go over a few common questions that we get around API management and service mesh. Those are things we'll eventually hopefully kind of get the answer to as we go through. We'll talk about the role of APIs. We'll cover some features of API management and service mesh. We will talk about trust domains, which is going to be useful for us to set up kind of why you use each and where they go. Then Miguel is going to give us an awesome demo with Apigee and ASM. Miguel, I think, then has a couple of questions for me, and then we will open up for Q&A. So with that, let's get started. So common questions. Do I need both Apigee and Anthos service mesh? Me, being an architect, doing this a long time, I'm going to give the typical architect answer, which is it depends. I think generally what we see is enterprises of a certain size that are gaining a certain maturity with their microservices, and certainly from an API perspective, the answer is generally going to be yes. From our perspective, you want both API management and a service mesh, but we'll talk about that. So don't I already get a mesh ingress with ASM? You sure do. But that, again, is not API management. It provides you some gateway capabilities, and we'll cover that a bit. Doesn't Anthos Service Mesh have similar features to Apigee? Certainly, there is some overlap, but I think what we'll talk about is there are some different personas that want to address either, and there are different capabilities, right? While there's some overlap, there are enough differences, and we'll sort of see. Next question, do I need any of this stuff? I'm going to go with my architect answer again. It depends. Maybe the answer is, hey, if I'm a really small team, just starting out, maybe you can get away without any of it, right? And you can do stuff quickly. But I think, again, generally the answer is going to be yes. Maybe the most important question, what's for dinner? I don't know the answer. I am open to suggestions. Feel free to let me know. All right, the role of APIs. So I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think we all understand how important APIs are in our day-to-day life, right? And if I just think about a typical retail experience, whether I'm on an app or a website, I'm looking up some particular product that I'm interested in, there are going to be things like a picture, there's going to be description, there's going to be reviews, maybe there's a Q&A section, there's going to be inventory, all of those things, maybe some shipping information. All of that, of course, is powered by APIs. And APIs are really what power those experiences that we all, right, assuming we know nothing about the technology and we're all either blessed or cursed, I don't know, because we kind of understand how this stuff all works. But there are experiences that we want and expect as a consumer, regardless of what the technology is doing. And APIs are what really power those experiences. So the real question becomes, how do we create those experiences for the end users faster and make them better? And what does that take? So what we like to think of as kind of this digital value chain from an API perspective, right? And you've got the end user, and of course, you're trying to develop that experience for the end user. The next level in, you've got your app developer. The app developer is the one who's really developing that experience for the end user. They want to be able to do that quickly and easily. So how do they do that? They do that by accessing APIs. And those APIs need to be well documented. Ideally, they're self-service, they are easy to understand, and they meet the needs of the experience that that app developer is trying to create. So that's great. They can see all those things. But how do we actually create those APIs? So now we've got to go a level deeper. And we've got the API team. And that API team needs to be able to create those APIs and really think about them as products, if you will. And you'll hear me say that a couple times. You might hear Miguel say it as well. But how do we make these products that are out there that make it easy for the app developers to create the experiences that the consumers need? And behind the API team, right, there might be a bunch of different stacks, a bunch of different services and things like that. And they need a way to be able to easily expose those to the app developers to be able to create those experiences. So that's APIs. Again, I said I was going to cover that pretty quickly. I think we all probably understand that. Just another view of it here. Again, this doesn't really say anything different other than there might be these other different services, right? Some of them might be modern, some of them might not be modern. Some of them might not even be REST. You want to be able to expose those as REST. API management is going to give you all of those capabilities. So let's now talk specifically about some of the capabilities, both of a service mesh and API management. So from a service mesh or service management perspective, there's a few different personas that I want to talk about. So first, let's talk about a DevOps engineer. And if I'm a DevOps engineer, what I really want to do is kind of have standard policies. I want to be able to monitor things. I want to be able to define my service level objectives. Maybe I want to understand what my error budget looks like so that I know it's safe to deploy that next release, et cetera, right? And oftentimes you think of this as an internal platform, but really what I care about as a DevOps engineer, again, we're always caring about that end experience, but I want to understand how my services are doing. As a service developer, basically what I want above all else is agility, right? I want to be able to create the features that I need or that the business needs, and I want to be able to create them quickly. I want to be able to roll them out safely so that I don't have a fear of breaking things as they're rolled out, et cetera. As a security officer, this is probably really important, right? We start to talk about zero trust now. And I think most security officers are moving towards a zero trust kind of a network. And so I want, consistent service security. I want encryption. I want zero trust. I want it to be auditable. I want to know what's happening. I want to be able to go look and understand the security. These are all things that are really important that a service mesh enables us to do as we manage our services, as we manage our services and our microservices. Now let's switch a little bit to API management persona. So one of the personas here that we like to think about is this product manager. And again, we like to say, think of APIs as products that are enabling these experiences. And a product manager is oftentimes not a technical role. And that product manager wants to be able to package these APIs, create documentation, and deliver them in an engaging way for the app developers to create these experiences. So it's an important differentiation that it may not be a technical role. And it's something that API management brings that Service Mesh doesn't necessarily bring, is the ability to package these things that way. As a developer, again, I think it's very similar. I want speed, I want agility. I want to be able to have an API management platform that allows me to package things in the way that my product manager really wants, regardless of kind of what system or what services I'm talking to. And then finally, as an app developer, I want to be able to easily consume those APIs. I want to be able to find them. I want to be able to sign up. I want to be able to start using them. And the way I think of it is, I was a developer, an engineer for a long time. I was lazy, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how things worked. So I wanted that to be simple and easy for me to understand. And if it wasn't, I often moved on to the next thing that might let me do the same piece. So let's talk about some service mesh capabilities in general. And I'm not going to go through each of these, don't worry. But at a high level, we've got monitoring, right? So we want to understand how all of our services are performing. We want to understand, again, that error budget. We want to know, ideally, before things break to the point of the consumers noticing, we want to know what's going on with our services, latency, error, et cetera. We want observability. So, ideally, it's easy for us to look at logs and metrics, understand the dependencies of all of these different services as they're calling each other. We want policy-driven security. This is really important from a zero trust perspective and from just lots of reasons. But one of the things that happens is if I'm a developer, right, I don't want necessarily to have to spend a bunch of time on security, and security changes as well. And so if I'm a security officer, I want to say maybe, hey, now we need to add, JOT-based authentication, or we need MTLS, or whatever it is. And I want to be able to do that without having to make the developers do a bunch of work to do these things. Again, that sort of policy-driven security that allows that easy to change, easy to understand security. And then, of course, you want to have those insights from a security perspective. What do things look like? Do I have all of the appropriate controls in place? You want reliability. This comes back, again, to that developer flexibility in my mind. If I can easily roll out a new service, I can split traffic, and that my risk is relatively low, it allows me to make changes quickly and get things into production without fearing that I'm going to bring down the entire site or the entire app or whatever it is. Now, those are all service mesh capabilities. Let's talk a little bit about Anthos Service Mesh in particular, which is Google's managed service mesh offering. It's based on Istio. Istio is the open source version. Google's one of the top contributors to the Istio open source service mesh. Will continue to be. But what we're really doing with Anthos Service Mesh, and the goal is to make it as easy as possible for you to operate. So that means a managed control plane. It means, managed proxy upgrades and things like that, right? How do we make the actual management of the service mesh super, super simple? And that's where a lot of effort's going. That's where development continues to go. There are other capabilities. I think, Miguel's going to show some dashboards and things like that you get out of the box with Anthos Service Mesh. But think of Anthos Service Mesh as Google's managed Istio offering. Now, let's talk about API management. Again, here we're talking specifically about Apigee API management. So you've got that gateway layer. We talked about security before with the service mesh. In this case, you'll also see security here, but the security concerns are maybe a little different. So certainly some of the things they do could be similar, right? Apigee can verify JOTs. Apigee can create JOTs, all of those things. You may have, at this layer, you may have different types of security, though. You might want OAuth or OIDC, and Apigee makes it very easy to do those things. You also might want things like threat protection to make sure that the payloads that are sending through are meeting certain standards. You might want bot detection or things like that, excuse me. The API gateway is really good for portions like that. You also have some traffic management. The mesh will be doing traffic management. The API gateway can do sort of quota-based per consumer traffic management really well. You move a level up, you've got API analytics. So certainly there's going to be some operational metrics that's going to overlap to some extent with what the service mesh provides. But there's also going to be more sort of business level or higher level analytics, understanding where are my calls coming from, what type of systems are calling, what developers are using which APIs, what are being successful, what aren't. These are metrics that product manager might look at to understand how to tweak the API program. And then finally, and arguably the most important piece of API management is that developer ecosystem. So how do we make it easy for developers to discover what's there? How do we make it easy for them to sign up? Maybe even at some point you want to be able to monetize and account for these APIs and track usage on a per call basis and be able to charge for that or share revenue, whatever it might be. So these are capabilities that API management provides. So let's talk about trust domains. So if we think about sort of a simple service mesh, right? If we've got this, so let's say Miguel and I on our team, we are the hotel API is what we're doing. We've got a bunch of services that were there. We sit across from each other. We could talk to each other. We kind of trust each other. And we've got the mesh. The mesh is handling all of the communication between all of our services. And so in this case, we've got a sort of that single trust domain. But what happens when we want to expose that to the outside world? In that case, what we need to do is we need to have a way that all of these external applications can access. And we can certainly do that through mesh ingress, right? So we can simply put a mesh ingress there. It would allow the access to these things, but it doesn't necessarily answer all of the questions, like how do we control access on a per consumer basis? How do people discover those APIs? How do they monetize the APIs? So that doesn't give us all of the answers, which is really now where we say, okay, we want to expose these services externally. And we'll talk a little bit about more what external means in a second, but we want to expose them externally. Then we're going to use Apigee or an API gateway and API management to do that. And it gives us some advantages, right? I talked about being lazy. So I'm lazy not just in I want to be able to do things quickly, but I also, don't necessarily want a bunch of people calling me and asking, hey, how do I use this API? Or, hey, can you set me up for access to allow me to use these APIs? And API management allows all of that to happen without Miguel and I having to worry about it, right? Folks can do that. The product manager can take care of allowing people to access who should access, who shouldn't access, all of that stuff. And it can take the concern away from Miguel and I. So again, I'm not going to go through this. I kind of talked about what Apigee and the API management platform does. So what happens when things become more complex, right? We talked about a really simple example there, but realistically, it's not just going to be a team that Miguel and I are on. There are going to be other teams. Any large enterprise, maybe these teams are dispersed throughout the world. So maybe we've got a casino team and we've got a restaurant team. They're developing their own APIs. And so each of these teams, in our mind, is a trust domain. And you have that trust within the team. It's easy to work within the team, kind of that pizza-sized team, right? Whatever, 4 to 8 people kind of a thing. And they're developing their APIs. So there could be different ways, right? We may or may not be super consistent in the way that we've developed all our services. Maybe we don't do errors the same way. Maybe we do pagination slightly different, those sorts of things. But eventually, we're going to want to expose these things out to the outside world. And again, API management lets us do that in a very consistent way so that the application developers that are creating these experiences for the end users don't have to understand the intricacies of how our teams are split up or where those services live. Or maybe even it can handle things like pagination and make changes to make it consistent if we haven't done a good job of doing that ourselves with style guides and things like that as we develop our services. But that's not the only way that we can think of this. So the way that I think of it, even when you're crossing these trust boundaries, right, from a zero trust perspective or a trust domain, it makes sense to be able to do API management for all of these same reasons, even internally. Again, whether it's understanding and discovering and being able to use these things. So if we have the control, the hotel API, and we need to talk to some of these other pieces, we would be able to do that through Apigee, going and finding and discovering, signing up for alerts, etc. And we have different deployment options. And here in this case, you'll notice the picture is a little different than the previous picture. Here was kind of a centralized API gateway. It's also possible that we can deploy sort of a lightweight, the Apigee adapter for Envoy, sort of a lightweight gateway that allows us to have that API management functionality, and it's deployed very near the cluster for internal use cases. Could be external as well, but oftentimes this is used for internal use cases. So with that, I have blathered on enough, and I will turn it over to the fun part. Miguel, I'll turn it over to you, and you can go through the demo.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Let me switch and start sharing my screen. All right. Let's go demo. All right. Hopefully all of you are able to see the screen. Okay. So as part of this demo, basically what I'm going to try to showcase in here is we're going to start at a high level with this architecture. We're going to have a boutique shop. You guys are probably familiar with the microservices demo that's already out there, which we call the boutique shop. And this is how this is architected. There is a Anthos service mesh with a set of services in there, and that's fronted by UI load balancer, and you have clients accessing that. But then we're going to take a next step or next level, and we're going to say, wait, what if we want to expose some of these services out to the world, right? How can we do that? And this is what I'm going to show you, basically the process that I went through to do this. So in this case, I added another ingress, which is separate from the UI ingress, and for a set of reasons, which I'll talk about later. And then we put Apigee talking to that ingress with its own load balancer and its own cloud armor policies and so on. So you now have two paths into this boutique shop set of microservices. One is a UI frontend, and another path which goes through Apigee for exposing APIs to clients. Now, those clients might be slightly different. The clients that access the UI versus the clients that access the API, and the protocols also vary. When the UI access these microservices, it basically has a front-end service that's doing mostly like server-side rendering stuff and calls to those services through gRPC, whereas the API that's exposed through Apigee, we want that to be a RESTful API for people to have an easy time to build those applications. All right, so enough of the architecture. Let's jump in and see kind of like what this looks like. So let me switch. All right, so here's what this boutique shop website looks like. And I mean, it's already secure. We are coming in through HTTPS, and from the, again, talking about zero trust security, it's about every single layer, as well as every single interaction, you need to have every step of the way secure. So again, typical website, you can come in for this. This is an e-shop, e-commerce shop. So I can add something to the cart. It's already filled in. I place an order, and boom, I have the the order confirmation and all of that. And behind this is all being powered by that service mesh that I showed you earlier. So let's jump in and see what that looks like. So basically, this is what's powering this experience behind the scenes. There is the ingress gateway from ASM. And this ingress gateway is fronted with a Google Cloud Load Balancer, which I showed you earlier. And that's how basically I got in. And this front-end service is basically what is powering the UI itself. And the front-end service then turns around and uses gRPC protocol to talk to those lower-level microservices that are powering the experience. Right. So let's say I'm the owner of this boutique shop, right? And I'm great. Everything is going well. I'm getting sales and everything, but I want to expand. I want to grow the business, and maybe partner with other stores so that those other stores can sell my product and submit orders to my store. How would I go?
Hey, Miguel. Hey, Miguel, I have a question for you. So this graph here, did you build this, or how did that come about?
No, this is all generated on the fly dynamically by Anthos Service Mesh. So because I have a load generator here, I'm kind of cheating a little bit, right? This is a load generator that's generating traffic. The Anthos Service Mesh, it's collecting all these metrics, and as it does so, it understands the shape of your mesh. So it knows that there's calls coming from the load generator and to the front end, and that itself calling other services. And you can see basically this is a timeline. This is a point in time where it looked like this based on the traffic at that time. So this is a differentiator versus open source Istio, where you can do this, but you have to bring other products, right? Whereas with Anthos Service Mesh, it's all in a single pane, right? You can come here and just look at your service mesh and say, show me the topology for doing this duration. So this is pretty cool by itself, right? You don't have to do a lot of work to get this. I literally just install ASM, install my microservices, send some traffic, and I have this already. And I'll dive deeper into other areas here where you can see this. Thanks for that question, Greg. All right, so back in here on the thread of I'm the boutique shop owner. I want to increase sales, right? So maybe I have a consultant team, and that consultant team tell me, hey, you need to have an API, right? For this thing that you want to do, where you want to have sellers, other partners coming and sell your products and submit orders to you, you should expose an API. So basically, how would I go about this? Right now, the way this is architected, right, the front end is talking gRPC to all these services, right? And in front of this is kind of like basically form data type of thing. It's not a proper API. So as I am, in this journey, right, the consultant team identifies, hey, to do this API, we're going to have to put another ingress in there, right, which is what I showed earlier, and then we can put an API management service in front of that, right? And that's what I want to show you next. But that doesn't mean you couldn't do it without API management, right? So if you wanted to, for example, let's say I set up the ingress, I set up another ingress, like I showed you there. Let me jump here. So let's say I'm in here up to this point. I just put this ingress right here, and you could technically send API traffic through here, and it will kind of fulfill the role of having an API, but you wouldn't get all the ecosystem API ecosystem around it, right? It would just be a plain API, and you would have to bring a lot of other stuff to complete the story, right? You could use service accounts, hand out those service accounts to those consumers, and put IAP identity aware proxy, and it will work, right? But it's not necessarily the best experience, right? For the best experience, you want to have a fully grown API ecosystem. Then that's where you bring API management, and you put the Apigee gateway in front of it to enable all of that. So how do we do that? What I did in this case was that I deployed as I showed you earlier here, another ingress gateway, and this ingress gateway, it's exposed to Apigee privately through our RFC 1918 IP address, whereas the other ingress gateway here on the left, this is exposed basically to the public through the Google Cloud Load Balancer. Right, so this one will be private connection between Apigee and the ingress gateway. And again, the connection between Apigee and the ingress gateway, that's MTLS protection. Let me show you something to, basically this is what it will look like, right? So you have Apigee here. The connection between these two is IRC 1918, and there is MTLS. So again, zero trust. We're crossing from one domain boundary to the next. You have to make sure that you're authenticated, and the data going on the wire is secure, right? So I've also added another small services in here, which basically allows me to talk gRPC to these services, but expose REST outside. And this may not always be necessary, right? This functionality, you can move it up the stack into the ingress gateway or even into Apigee. In this case, it was really quick to just put Envoy here doing gRPC transcoding. All right, so now let's back up in here. So this is what it looks like, and I can show you. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm only exposing a few of the services in here. So through the API ingress gateway, I'm only exposing currency service, order service, and catalog service, because that's what I identify that those partners we're going to need to use. And you can see here also that this ingress gateway is exposed, like I said, through IRC 1918. So it's a traffic within the cluster that Apigee is going to hit. Now let's kind of switch hats and go into Apigee and see from the persona of the API product manager and the API developer, what it looks like to expose those services for external consumption. So first of all, I would need to create proxies. The Apigee gateway relies on the proxy definitions, which basically are reverse proxies. For each of these proxies are mapped one-to-one to those services that I have over there. And I also have a what's called a target server, right? That it's going to hit that IP address, that internal address. So these API proxies, they rely on that definition of the target server. And within each of these proxies, I have other policies as well, such as API key validation. I have threat protection policies, and even quota policies. Now, those policies that I mentioned specifically around security, again, back to zero trust, right? This is another layer now where we need to add security. This is a cross-coding consent for all these policies. So I didn't just go in and add them individually to each proxy. What I did is I created an Apigee share flow, and the share flow is basically like a little library that you can import into each of the proxy definitions. And this share flow itself is what contains those policies. So as I mentioned earlier, I have API key verification, I have a threat protection policy, and I also have a quota policy in here. All right, so this is all great. So now I have this, APIs exposed through Apigee, but let's go back into the original request from the shop owner, right? Which was they want those partners to start using the API and basically sign up for them. So how does Apigee help you with this? That's where we come into the developer portal, the developer ecosystem. So in Apigee, there's what we call integrated portals, and you can come in here in the Apigee UI on the portals tab, and in a matter of minutes, you can stand up a portal, which I already did. You have this portal already created. Literally, I just asked me, give me the name, give me the description, and after a couple of minutes, there's a portal running. Now, you do have to then configure it a little bit. You have to come into the portal and define what you want to expose to that portal, right? Out of those proxies that I have there, I want to expose them to the portal. And to do that, I need basically to productize these proxies, right? And that's where Apigee API products come in, where as a product manager, I decide a strategy to package up these products for external consumption. In this case, I have picked a very simple strategy, which is literally one-to-one. I have, for every single proxy, I have an API product. There's many other ways of doing this. You could organize it maybe into tiers, product tiers, where you say there's a gold tier, silver tier, bronze tier, and each of them could give you different levels of access. That's another way of organizing. For this demo, one-to-one, simple enough. It gets the point across. All right, so back onto the portal. In the portal itself, I imported those products as catalogs, and I also, with each product, I put an open API spec, and that took me, I don't know, like 20 more minutes. After 30 minutes, I was fully up, and I have a developer portal already live that people can access. So let me jump in and show you that. So this is the developer portal that I created. Refresh the page. So you can see it's live. I'm not actually faking this. So, and in this developer portal, I have, actually I'm not signed in now, but you can see I have a couple of those services, the product services and the order services, which map to those internal gRPC services that I have in the mesh. If I sign in, I can probably see the third one, which the currency services. Now this signing part, I'm signing in as a developer, right? So now I'm pretending to be that partner that wants to use the APIs exposed by the shop owner. So as a partner, I come in, I create an account, I sign in, And now I have full access. I can see all these APIs. I can discover all the APIs that the shop, the boutique shop is exposing, and I can go into them and basically find out, documentation about the API, how to use it, right? And I can even try them out. So how do I go about trying them out? Well, I go and create an app, which I have already done in this case. So I create the app, give it a description, and then select the services that I want to access through this app. I have already gone ahead and created an app, just call it Miguel app, and I subscribe to each of the services. And as soon as I do that, I create my app, I have an API key that I can use to start calling those services. Now, in this case, it's the onboarding experience can be controlled by the product manager, right? You can say, hey, for one product needs approval, whereas the other one, it doesn't need approval. In this case, they're all open, so they just for the demo purpose. So let's see how that works. So I go in and let's say I want to try the product services API. Let's just do a get, and let's authorize to make sure that the API key for my app is passed into it. Click authorize and execute, and great. So I get a catalog of products. So as the partner, this is information that I would want to put in my shop, and then submit orders. And I could also come in and let's try the orders API as well, maybe. And again, authorize, select the app. And if I go into orders, I'm just going to copy the example JSON in here. And execute, and great. So an order is created, and you can see this is the same process that I did at the beginning of the demo, where I went through the boutique shop UI and submitted an order and got a confirmation, all that. But now this is enabled through an API experience that partners can start using, right? And that it makes a huge difference, because now I'm opening up to other business channels. And this is all going through Apigee. Like if I didn't pass a API key, for example, let's say I clear the API key and execute this, I get an error saying, hey, failed to resolve API key. This is Apigee returning that error, right? So this is not the service mesh returning this error. So Apigee understands that there's apps, that there's products, and then there's subscriptions between them. And if you don't have an API key to access that API proxy, you cannot get past that gate. Right? There's also, like, for example, threat protection. So if I come in, let's go back to orders, and suppose that somebody using the API is trying to abuse the system, and maybe they want to do some SQL injection. And instead of a credit card, they try to do an insert into some table. And we try to execute, and I have already a policy in Apigee that says, hey, please scan the payloads to see if there is any SQL queries or anything that looks like a SQL query in the payload. And Apigee detects that and says, hey, you know what? You cannot send this call because it looks like you're doing some type of SQL injection. Again, Apigee is doing this for us in this case. We can also do other stuff like quotas and rate limits in the Apigee level. So if I go back and let's try the products API. And let's do make sure I'm authorized. Yes, I am. So if I keep executing this, let's say a few times, eventually I get a rate limit violation or quota violation. For the purpose of this demo, I have set this up to allow only 10 requests per minute, just so that I could quickly show you. But this is all modifiable. You can define the quotas at the product level, and you could even make them customizable per app. So you could have an app that has more quota or less quota, depending on the level of access that you want to provide to those partners. So now, as the shop owner, back onto the original thread of the demo, partners can start coming in on board and use the API. But how do I know if this is if my API program is being successful or not, right? So I need metrics. I need to measure things, right? And so Apigee has out of the box analytics that let you kind of understand what's going on. Like, what if I want to see who is sending orders? Is there a very valuable partner that's sending more orders than others? So if I go into analyze and, like, for example, check and developers and look at developer engagement. In this tab, I can see which apps are sending most of the traffic, right? So this is like my MVPs, and how many of these developers are actually active. Whereas maybe somebody just signed up, got an API key, but they're not actually using the API. And I could even, let's say I want to look at traffic composition and look to see, where are, let's answer a question. For example, I want to see where the orders are coming from around the world. So I can go into GeoMap, and I want to show only the orders proxy, and I can see that most orders are coming, in this case, from United States, China, and Brazil. And I could keep digging deeper to see which app is sending more orders, right? So you get key business analytics inside through Apigee, but it doesn't stop there. From the, this dashboards help the business persona, but what about the DevOps persona, right? Or the security persona? There's also analytics dashboards to help with this, right? So, for example, we have API monitoring dashboards where you can see more of like the DevOps, what the DevOps folks want to see, right? They want to take a look at, how fast are these proxies? Is there one that's being slower? What the number of errors that are happening, right? Is there these are typical errors, 400, for 1, for 29, and it's pretty low value. And from here, I can dig in deeper and investigate at the API level. But let's say I spot a problem and I want to dig deeper, and I hit a limit of the analytics that Apigee can provide. Well, that's when I jump into the analytics or the metrics that we have in Anthos service mesh. So if we go back into the mesh, you can see that for every single service, before we're looking at metrics based on APIs, and those APIs kind of aggregate the services in here. But now we're looking at individual services, right? We identified the problem in one of the services or one of the APIs, and we want to dig deeper. Then we can look at first at a high level, what are the overall metrics, for each of the services. And you can see there's two main indicators here, the 50th percentile and the 99th percentile. And I can see that I have a little warning here in the checkout service, which is saying, hey, it's not meeting the SLO. So maybe we should go ahead and investigate this a little bit more. So I can open in the checkout service. And again, this is all live based on the traffic that's been sent. You can see the checkout services sending calls to these other 3 services plus 3 more. And maybe let's show what happens for the last week. And we do get some more metrics, but we can also inspect the health of the service based on service level objectives that you set up. So in this case, I had set a service level objective where I wanted the 90th percentile to stay below 350 milliseconds. And looks like, let me go back, maybe the last 6 hours. During the last 6 hours, this hasn't been happening. Here's my 350 millisecond line, and all these calls right here are exceeding the 350 milliseconds. So that means I'm slowly eating into my error budget for this SLO. So I need to take care of this, because at some point I'm not going to have any error budget left, right? Every day it's going to keep consuming my error budget. And now in this case, I found out manually by coming in, but you don't have to be on top of these graphs all the time, just looking at them, right? After you have this SLO created, you can create an alert so that you can get alerted when the SLO is exceeded. Right, and there's different channels that you can get alerted, like email or text message and that kind of thing. So that's the kind of like the experience in here, where you have metrics in ASM that help you monitor the services individually, and you can create SLOs for each of those services. And in this case, I had just this 90% percentile SLO. That's all I have for this demo. We can jump back into the deck, Greg. I'll stop sharing my screen. And
awesome. Thanks, Miguel.
All right. Let me stop sharing.
All right. So I'll tell you what, Miguel, we're getting close to the end of the time. I want to leave some time for questions. I'll let you, I know you had some questions for me. Why don't you pick one question? Whatever question you think is the most important.
Sure. During the demo, I showed all this architecture, and there were a lot of hops between the calls, right?
Yep.
Like from the point of view, the client comes in to the point the call actually reaches the gRPC service.
Yep.
Is there any like latency being added in there? Like, should I be worried about that?
I'd be very concerned, and now that you bring that up, I would actually say this whole thing's a bad idea. So never mind on the webinar. Now, so of course, there's being latency. There is latency being added. No question about that. The question really comes down to, is the latency being added worth the value that it's adding? And in my opinion, I think the answer to that is unequivocally yes, right? So first of all, a couple of things on that. The latency is going to be pretty low. I know that we work with Istio and Anthos Service Mesh. We're constantly tweaking, doing what we can to decrease that latency. In that case, right, it's a sidecar proxy. So that sidecar is running in the pod. And it's it's as close as possible to the actual workload, if you will. From an Apigee perspective or an API management perspective, there's a lot of different deployment options that we have. I mentioned that briefly, but we've got anything from that Apigee adapter for Envoy, where it runs basically anywhere that Envoy runs, to a fully managed SaaS model that will run in GCP data centers around the world, to what we call Apigee Hybrid, which is the fully featured runtime, and it runs on top of any supported Kubernetes platform. That is sort of our multi-cloud and hybrid offering, where it can run in your data center or across multiple clouds. So yeah, good question, Miguel.
Thanks.
So with that, let's go to kind of just some next steps. So certainly you can reach out to your Google Cloud representative. You can reach out to Miguel or I. Here's just some links. Even if you Google Apigee or you Google Anthos Service Mesh, there's lots of different things out there that you can try. Just looking at the documentation, there are quick labs, all of those kinds of fun things. And then I will plug shamelessly our next AMP Jam App Mod session. It's going to be the 12th at 9 a.m. and it's going to be choreographing event-driven CI/CD for Kubernetes on any cloud. Should be a good session. It will, for those that have been attending any of these sessions, it will not be me. I know I've presented a few of these, so you'll have a break and you'll have some other presenters, but should be a good session. With that, I will go ahead and open it up for questions.